At the time, the Muslims were the world's dominant civilization, and Europe was a backwater. And Europe was a backwater that resented being a backwater because Europe remembered being the Roman Empire. And now it's like this third-rate civilization where people can't read and write, and you have Islamic civilization suddenly advancing in every area. And so the Crusades, the argument of my script was that the Crusades were really a flip where Richard the Lionheart was Bin Laden, and Saladin represented sort of the wave of civilization trying to stop the terrorists, because the Crusaders were, by our modern standards, terrorists. I mean, they had no problem killing non-combatants, women and children. They actually used a really horrific form of, in the First Crusade, they used cannibalism as a means of terrifying their adversaries in the Middle East. They would actually attack villages, eat the women and children, and tell people, okay, this is what we're going to do to you if you don't surrender. So that's a part of Western civilization we've forgotten. We think barbarism is only in this world. I mean, yet our own heritage has some pretty horrific barbaric stuff that people had no problem with at the time. The reason we know about the cannibalism is the Crusaders, what the Muslim historians and the Crusaders wrote about. The Crusaders were quite happy to write about the fact that they ate people. So, so that script is one. I have another epic I've written on the love story of the Taj Mahal, which is just a beautiful epic story of eternal love. So if any of you go to the Taj Mahal, most people don't know, there's a woman buried inside of it. It's a very tragic story. The prince losing the princess and going mad and spending his whole life building the Taj Mahal. For me, that story represents something. I mean, we have these great Romeo and Juliet tales. That's a story that's a true story out of the Muslim world. I mean, the idea of eternal love, right, coming out of the Taj Mahal. If you go to the Taj Mahal is actually a mosque. It's covered in Quranic calligraphy. Most people don't realize it's still used as a mosque today. You can go there, there's prayers. And so that's a story I've written, and I've got a few teen horrors. I write big epics and I write teen horror movies, and that's what More questions?
I was wondering about Islamic practice and how it's depicted. Because here you have Darwin, and he's a hero, and yet you have him, engaged in fornication.
Yes,
basically.
that's a good one. That was actually the biggest problem. The Muslim community they're sort of burned out and used to, okay, Muslim guy, Allahu Akbar, kill women and children. I mean, they're used to that, or they don't like it, but they were very unhappy with Darwin, the hero, the Muslim guy, having sex outside of marriage. Now, we're all in college, so I think we all know that sex outside of marriage is relatively common in America, right? So it is not common in the Muslim world. It's still not common in the Muslim world. It's not common amongst Muslim Americans. Muslim Americans are very socially conservative. Very few Muslims I know have actually had sex outside of marriage. It's still, that's in the 21st century. People are shocked by that.
Or before marriage.
Or before marriage, yeah. It's just not something that's done. And so when I came on, I saw the pilot. In the pilot, as you saw, he's having this affair with this woman, and I said, guys, this is going to be a huge problem because it just doesn't happen that much. It happens, but it's not something. It's not as where we are in Western civilization, where you can go have sex with your boyfriend or your girlfriend and tell your friends about it. You're not going to get, people aren't going to be like, oh, yeah, that's great, It'll be like, oh, brother, it's time to go to the mosque and ask forgiveness, I mean, it's not something you do quietly and you don't tell anybody about. That's still Muslim American life, 21st century, And so that was the biggest complaint we had from the Muslim community, and my response was two responses. One is, okay, well, I didn't create the show. That's the situation I was dealt with. So I asked him to insert that scene that you saw in the pilot where they're in bed and they're talking about that he feels some guilt about this, because if he's going to be a practicing Muslim guy, he should at least be aware of the fact that this is still considered really deeply morally wrong in the Muslim community, right? And he had to acknowledge that. And the second thing I said, well, look, dramatically, it's an interesting character. He's been in jail, undercover for over a year. He's lonely. He's unable to tell anybody the truth of who he is. Someone like that is going to seek release in the arms of another human being. That's a human moment. And most of the Muslim community didn't really see the dramatic purpose of it. I'm happy with it altogether. So.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could explain the theology or the rules behind, because Fark says, we'll go pay for a whore.
Yes. Well, they thought, again, I would argue that it's not theology. I mean, the Al-Qaeda guys pick and choose what they need to, right? So that's how they work, and that's what we see here. They'll pick a verse from the Quran that lets them, they want to do X, it says, okay, that verse sounds like I can do that, right? And so then they'll ignore all the other context. So with regard to this, I mean, that's based on the real life lives of the September 11th hijackers. They all had girlfriends, they went to strip clubs, they did all kinds of stuff, and the way they rationalized it to themselves was, we are in the land of the infidel, and we must pretend, if we're going to be undercover amongst the infidel, we must participate in the infidel's lifestyle so that they don't notice. I mean, that's a very convenient rationalization. But, Islamic laws, because, Islam was born in a military environment, right? It started off as a pacifist movement. It was attacked by its opponents in Arabia, and in the process of defending itself, it had to have military situations. So that Quran has a lot of military stuff in it. But because of that, because Muhammad was also a warrior as well as a prophetic figure, you have to have rules of war, and they were established very early in Islam. And the rules of war: you can't kill women, you can't kill children, you can't kill someone who drops a sword, you can't poison wells, you can't burn trees. I mean, these were very harsh rules. And remember, this is the 7th century when no one in the world followed that. Those rules were considered inconvenient in the 7th century, and so the Muslims always prided themselves for the last 1,000 years that we were, even in warfare, we were more morally advanced than Westerners, right? And so that that whole situation has changed a little bit in the last century, but that this has been this whole thing. Why it's so painful for me as a Muslim is that this isn't really part of the heritage. But one of the greatest prides Muslim has that when Christians had no problem eating people, we had rules of war. They were inconvenient for us to have these rules of war, and they were strict rules, and we lost battles because of them. And so it was something of great pride for Muslims that we had this heightened sense of morality around human conflict. And now the very fact that was once a great pride of our civilization is the very thing that's now said, well, you guys are barbarians. It's really a painful thing for Muslims to look at where history is at this moment. Yes. Let her first, please. Yes.
I was going to ask, you said earlier some of the actors were Muslim?
Some of them were. The gentleman who played Zayd Abdul Malik, he's Muslim, he's Egyptian. He's a friend of mine. He's a good guy.
Okay, so did the rest of the actors have a crash course in Islam or anything like that?
Yeah. We actually gave all the actors the Complete Idiot's Guide to Islam, which is actually quite good, and that's a very useful guide. And I was there. I was there, and we had an Arabic language advisor who was a Muslim there to guide them on the set. And so the practices, they had to learn how to pray and do those things properly, how to wash themselves before prayers, and so we were there to guide them on that.
I was just wondering if Sleeper Cell's ever been shown internationally? And
Yeah,
if there's
it's been shown overseas.
Okay.
It did very well in Australia. It did okay in Europe.
What was the reception in France, considering the kind of
Reception,
franchise?
it was on a smaller cable channel, so a lot of people didn't see it. And that's actually what happened. Is I was actually but some executives saw it. And when I was in France on a project just for the last 6 weeks. I just got back last week, and I was asked while I was there by one of the big networks, a network called Canal Plus, which is like the HBO of France. So I was asked by Canal Plus to create a show that looks at these themes, and that's what I've been working on for the last 6 weeks. And so, because now we have in that show we have a French Muslim guy who's infiltrating Al Qaeda. It's very different from Sleeper Cell, but the themes are being looked at. Yes.
Since one of the stereotypes I think that is propagated about Islam is that it's a misogynistic
Yes.
religion and
Yes.
it has a negative depiction of women.
Yes.
I haven't seen enough of Sleeper Cell to know if you ever deal with that, but how is that dealt with and how do you combat that?
We dealt with it more in the second season because in the new cell in the second season, there's a second cell. The first cell fails, several of the members are killed or captured. In the second season, a new cell is sent because that's how they work. Once they fail, the Al Qaeda just tries again. That's what they did with the World Trade Center. They never give up. And so a second cell is sent, and one of the main characters in there is a woman, a really wonderful actress, Dutch actress named Kekla Reuten. And so she played a Dutch woman who had converted to Islam, whose husband had died in Iraq, and now she was here for personal revenge against the Americans. And in those episodes, I went out of my way to have those discussions because here you have this beautiful blonde woman who is a Dutch woman who is a Muslim, and so she interacts with the character of Gail, who is Darwin's girlfriend, and there's a lot of moments where they discuss that. Where there's actually, and I was quite delighted they kept the entire. In one episode, episode 3 that I wrote in the second season, there's almost a 10-minute talk between them as women talking about Islam, and and she asks those questions. Gail asks, my boyfriend's a Muslim, but I got to say, it's a pretty shitty religion. You got to dress this way, you got these restrictions. I mean, why? And the interesting thing is, Mina gives the defense of why Islam, even traditional Islam, where you wear the headscarf and all these things, is more emancipating towards women. And the argument is that Western culture thinks it's emancipated, but all it is just made women meet. It's put them on Victoria's Secret covers, it's put them on the cover of Maxim. Here in college, I was walking around, I was like, oh, these beautiful girls, So it was just, it has that sort of the Muslim argument that Western culture thinks it's emancipated, but it's taken away women's dignity and made them sexual objects. And that the headscarf is a means of, Muslim feminists, liberal feminists would argue too, that the headscarf is a means of defying Western efforts to make women objects. You know, it's similar like burning the bra.